So a little history about breadfruit. So breadfruit originally comes from Southeast Asia. So an island called Tahiti. So it was brought by Captain William Bligh in 1793. Right, that was the first time that breadfruit successfully, I must say successfully, was brought to the Caribbean, not to Grenada. It was first brought to St. Vincent, and it later made its way to Grenada, but it was brought to the Caribbean successfully in 1793. And I say successfully because Captain William Bligh made a trip back in 1789. It was a trip bringing, of course, breadfruit trees to the Caribbean, but he was unsuccessful in bringing it. There was mutiny. Mutiny is like revolt or rebellion aboard the ship, the HMS Bounty ship, and unfortunately, he was unable to bring the breadfruit trees that was on board the ship to the Caribbean. So it was on his second voyage he left Tahiti in around 1791 to made it all the way to the Caribbean. And it was on his second trip that he was successful in bringing over 300 breadfruit trees to the Caribbean. And of course, it was first brought to St. Vincent. So if you ever ask yourself, why is it that St. Vincent have so much breadfruit? Actually, it was St. Vincent where the breadfruit trees was first brought by Captain William Bligh in the Caribbean. Right, so some of the breadfruit, and that's very true. I know for sure some of the breadfruit that we get in Grenada, even now during our long season, February, some of the breadfruit comes from St. Vincent, right? So St. Vincent too. There's lots of breadfruit trees. Breadfruit is found in abundance, right? And the breadfruit arrives on board the ship that comes from St. Vincent on a weekly basis. And some of the market vendors and even the supermarkets, the breadfruit they're selling is actually from St. Vincent. And as I said, that's not surprising because St. Vincent was the first island in which the breadfruit was introduced back in 1793 by Captain William Bligh. And of course, as I mentioned, the breadfruit is a vegetable, um, and it's Southeast Asia origin. If you're looking live in the especially if you live in the diaspora, whether in the US or in Canada or in the UK, you get a similar, very similar vegetable. It's called a jackfruit. Right? It looks very similar to breadfruit. I see it in the supermarket all the time, and you think it's breadfruit, but no, it's jackfruit, and it's they're from the same family, right? So they're cousins. If you want to think about, they're like cousins, right? So the jackfruit is a cousin of the breadfruit. So they're a similar type in look. So the appearance of the jackfruit is very similar to the breadfruit, and then when you cut it on the inside, it's that thick, fleshy um col color, beige color, right? Similar taste. The breadfruit is, in my opinion, is nicer than the jackfruit, but very similar taste, right? And yeah, so it's a cousin of the breadfruit, so the jackfruit. And like the Jamaicans, they have it in tin, right? So if you go in the supermarket, especially as I said, if you live in the diaspora, you if you go in any ethnic supermarket or even the regular supermarket and you check out the ethnic aisles, right, there is jackfruit and you get it in the tin. So like the company Grace Foods, they would have like jackfruit in tin and you could buy it off the supermarket shelf. They also have breadfruit in tin, right? We are not yet at that level in Grenada in terms of agro processing to have breadfruit in tin and to be able to really capitalize on the opportunity for further export of our agricultural produce by having the breadfruit available. So in a tin, like you could can it. The process is called canning it. You could can the breadfruit, and therefore it could be easily exported to those who are, especially those Grenadians who are living in the diaspora. So definitely there's lots of business opportunities in agro processing that we have not yet explored as an independent nation, and it's something definitely that we should think about more. We really need to think about this more and action it, because there's thought, there's conversations about something, but there's also action in it as we enter. We look for the next 50 years. What's the next 50 years of being an independent nation looks like? We definitely have to think up more about agro processing and the opportunities that lie with agro processing of our local fruits and vegetables. So yes, independence is once a year. We only talk about what does independence mean in February, but it's a conversation as we reflect upon what we can achieve in 50 more years or so to definitely put agro processing right up on the top 10 list of how we want to move forward as an independent nation. So that's the breadfruit. So that's how the breadfruit arrived in Grenada. It actually came from St. Vincent, and it was brought originally by Captain William Bligh from Tahiti. Okay. So when breadfruit arrived in 1783 to the Caribbean region, as I said, firstly to St. Vincent and later Grenada, one of the main reasons that it was brought was as a supplement to the food eaten by the slaves. Remember, slavery was still in existence. Slavery did not end until 1834, right? 1834, with the passing of the Emancipation Act, slavery ended in 1834. So when breadfruit arrived in 1783, for sure, slavery was still ongoing. There was the existence of the sugar plantations. There were slaves who were still working on the sugar cane fields, right? So breadfruit was the interest in breadfruit was to for it to be used as a supplement to the slave's diet, right? Of course, the slave masters, who were the Europeans, Grenada at the time in that 1783 period, would have been under control of the French, right? So during that time, um, the interest was in feeding the slaves, right? Because you had thousands of slaves, you had to feed them, give them food every day for them to work, of course. So the interest was in feeding the slaves and ensuring that they had food to eat. And you know that breadfruit is very filling, right? Breadfruit is very filling. Like if you cook breadfruit, by the time you eat like two, three slices of breadfruit, like you feel, right? It's very filling. So that's one of the main reasons why the Europeans were interested in bringing breadfruit, because it would supplement the diet of the slaves, and it was good healthy food for them to eat and be able to work, right? To work on the sugar plantations. Of course, today we do know that breadfruit can be prepared in many different ways. So breadfruit can be cooked, it can be steamed, right? Where you cook it like you could cook it like and include it in oil dung. That's the main vegetable used in oil dung. You could also steam it, so you could have like steamed breadfruit with other provision and dumpling, right? So you could steam the breadfruit, you can roast it, right? So you could roast the breadfruit on open fireside, you can roast the breadfruit, and in truth, roasting of breadfruit was done a lot I don't know today. I don't know many people don't travel back. Like if you go to Grenada, those who travel down to Grenada and back up during the year. But those who used to make that trip definitely pre-COVID times, the roasting of the breadfruit was one way. So you had the breadfruit roasted, and then you're able to um store it away nicely in foil and so forth, and pack it in your suitcase, and then that will help it make the trip. Whether wherever you're going in the US, anywhere in the US, anywhere in Canada, anywhere in the UK, right? So the roasting of the breadfruit, what was you roast it on open fireside, and then once it's roasted, then you can I say pack it out with nicely in foil paper, wrap it properly, and put it in your luggage, and then bring it up on your trip. And of course, fry breadfruit, right? Fry breadfruit um is another way in which breadfruit can be prepared. So there's many numerous ways in which you could prepare breadfruit. And today, breadfruit, there's one local company, and we'll probably share them with the about them more sometime on our Facebook page, that is making local breadfruit chips. Right, so local breadfruit chips. So do check them out. I can't remember the name of the company, but we'll do share on our Facebook page when I do find out that information. But I saw it on one of the programs that they're making local breadfruit chips, and that's an excellent initiative, right? To use breadfruit in such an innovative and creative way. We are used to the normal Irish potato chips, of course, but breadfruit chips and using local vegetables to make chips. So you could have breadfruit chips and fried chicken. That's an excellent way to use breadfruit. So breadfruit can be prepared in many different ways. You could make breadfruit pie. I have made breadfruit pie in the past, very similar to how you make macaroni pie, but instead of using macaroni, you use breadfruit, and then you do all the other process in making it, right? You can also do breadfruit salad. So instead of doing like potato salad, coleslaw, you can do breadfruit salad, and it tastes just but I love breadfruit salad. Like, that's one of the things that I enjoy, breadfruit salad. So many different ways in which you could prepare breadfruit for sure. Just gonna check my comments here. Of course, if you do know more than me, drop a comment. Um, right, moving on. So what else about the breadfruit? So the breadfruit tree itself, and I was, I guess, fortunate to have a breadfruit tree growing in my um backyard when I was growing up. So in Western, in our family home, right, there was a breadfruit tree right behind of the house, right? So, and a breadfruit tree is very tall. So breadfruit tree typically grows over 6 feet high. So they're very tall trees, right? And when they mature, they're extremely tall. So if you have a breadfruit tree in the back of your house or in your land, as we say in Grenada, you'll know how very tall breadfruit trees are. They tend not to be very wide, but they are very tall. So typically they grow over 6 feet in height, and our breadfruit is very heavy. Like the young ones, not so much, but definitely when the breadfruit is full, as we say, we have young breadfruit, and then you have when the breadfruit is full, right? So when the breadfruit is full, it's good for roasting. Right, so usually you would roast a breadfruit that's full and mature. When I say full and mature, it's fully ready. The young breadfruit tends to be smaller, and you typically use the younger breadfruit in oil dung. Like if you get a mature breadfruit to make a oil dung, it tastes okay, right? But it's not the best, right? So definitely having a younger breadfruit is best for oil dung, meaning that the breadfruit is not fully mature as yet, right? And once you cut it, if it's young or if it's mature, right? Also the look, right? The breadfruit that is more mature tends to be a definitely a paler green, and it might have starting to get like brown spots on it, as opposed to the younger breadfruit that is more fully green, right? And has that nice green color. So our breadfruit can weigh anywhere from 2 to 6 pounds. As I said, if it's very mature, it's probably gonna be over 6 pounds. So very bit heavy. So if it's younger, 2 pounds, right? So it has some weight to it. So in terms of vegetables, it's probably one of the heavier vegetables as compared to, carrot, cabbage. Some you could get some big cabbage, but carrot, cabbage, and even the ground provisions like yam and so forth, right? But the breadfruit is one of the heavier vegetables, of course. And the breadfruit is very high in carbohydrates. So it's a starchy vegetable, right? So that's one of the reasons why it is so very filling, is because it's high in carbohydrates, and carbohydrates tend to fill you. So foods that are rich in carbohydrates tend to fill you a lot more than foods that aren't. So the breadfruit for sure is very rich in carbohydrates, right? So definitely, why breadfruit is good for you. Those folks who may be suffering, especially if you're suffering, you're diabetic, even if you have high blood pressure, the advice is not too much breadfruit. So if you're eating oil dung, not too much breadfruit, because the starch, when the starch breaks down, it turns into glucose, right? And that increases your sugar, right? So folks who are definitely either hypertensive, maybe hypertensive or high blood pressure, but definitely if you're diabetic, um you have to be very careful with the amount of breadfruit that you consume, because as I said, when it breaks down, it eventually turns into glucose, and that increases your sugar level. But in terms of filling your stomach, right, excellent, like 2 3 slices of breadfruit, and but I know I'm filled. Like some other people might need way more breadfruit to fill their stomach, but my stomach is smallish in size, right? So it's not that filling, it's smallish in size. So definitely it fills you. In terms of the breadfruit tree, so as I said, the breadfruit tree typically grows over 6 feet in height. And one breadfruit tree can produce anywhere between 50 to 150 breadfruits. And so when you see a breadfruit tree, you see some breadfruit trees. Like if you're passing over, like for example, if you're passing over the Granada, and when you start climbing over the hills, as we call it in Grenada, there's so many breadfruit trees, and some of them are so laden, right? So they're laden. We say laden with breadfruit, right? So they have close to over 100 breadfruits on the tree, right? Some trees not as much. It just depends, I guess, on where they're located, and if they're not some if the tree doesn't suffer from any disease, um if it's a healthy breadfruit tree, it could probably produce the 150 breadfruit. But those that are maybe suffering, as I said, suffering from some disease or whatever climatic conditions they may be in, mightn't be ideal. But definitely lots of breadfruit on the trees for a mature breadfruit tree. And breadfruit grows around the year. Although in some times of the year, like now, especially if in Grenada, no, there is breadfruit. And sometimes breadfruit is very scarce. Like when you want breadfruit, there isn't, and that's why we have to go to Saint Vincent and get breadfruit from Saint Vincent, right? It grows around the year, but sometimes of the year it's just more in abundance than other times of the year, right? And So when there's lots of breadfruit around people, as I said, different ways to prepare it. You can fry it, you can steam it, you can use it to make oil dough, you can roast it on open fire, right? And you can incorporate it into your main dishes that you prepare, right? Once it's available. And yes, definitely drop any comments if you want to share anything else about the breadfruit